Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're going to do a little bit of a Q&A here with a lot of questions that came in from Taiwan. So thank you so much to everybody who sent in these questions. Of course, my name is Josh Allen. I'm one of the community managers here at Blizzard. Joining me, game director Ion Hazzikostas.
Hey, great to be here. Looking forward to answering these questions.
Awesome. So let's just get right into them. First one came from, I believe it's Tyrael Lightsworn, who said, Legion has been a great expansion, both in terms of storyline and game mechanics, and has been very friendly towards casual and new players. However, high-end elite players usually have a different take on new expansions, always striving to figure out how to min-max their progress. Though luck has always played a part in WoW, they feel that it factors a little too heavily in many aspects of this expansion. Hidden artifact appearances, legendary items, and profession recipe/pattern drops all rely on luck. Could you please explain why RNG plays such a larger part in Legion compared to previous expansions?
So, I certainly agree that Legion has had a lot to offer for a wide variety of playstyles. I'm not sure that it's necessarily fair to say that RNG is more prominent now than it has been before. It just takes a different form, takes a different expression. I think randomness and random loot has been a part of World of Warcraft since literally day one of the endgame. You know, whether it was people running Blackwing Lair in 2005 and complaining that they only saw Nemesis pieces and that they couldn't complete the set pieces they wanted, whether it was people running Gruul's Lair for literally a year and a half in Burning Crusade, trying to get the Dragonspine trophy that was necessary equipment for high-end melee DPS, or killing Illidan over and over again, and some guilds, I think famously Nihilum at the time, not having a complete set of Warglaives anywhere in their raid group, while other groups had 2 or 3 and had an advantage as a result. Obviously, you know, being on the bad end of randomness is never a fun experience when it feels like you've put in a lot of time, a lot of effort, and haven't been rewarded. But I think it's important to have some uncertainty in terms of expectations for there to be moments of excitement and surprise. If everyone could get the same things, if you always knew, you know, if everything were, you know, a vendor or a currency, and you could just mark the date on your calendar, okay, 2.5 weeks from now, I'm going to achieve this item. It takes something away from that experience. So I think we've tried over the years to temper and shape the way that randomness expresses itself. And we have systems behind the scenes helping to ensure that there aren't extreme variances between those who are luckiest and those who are less lucky. Obviously, we have more work to do on that front. You know, I think things like the legendary system, part of the problem there, it's that we probably haven't been as generous as we should have been across the board in how these items drop and how many of them drop. That's something we're continuing to look at, continuing to increase. I would expect legendary items to become more common as the expansion goes on. We probably were too initially conservative with them. But ultimately, I mean, even at the high-end game, I think we feel that both high-end PvP and high-end rating are in healthy places right now overall. The results of the high-end competitive raid race have not depended on who happened to get more legendaries or more Titan Forged items. They've depended on who had the greater amount of skill, dedication, and organization. Now, obviously, if you're looking at competition on a different level, and the thing you want more than anything else is to be the number one DPS hunter in your region, then yes, you know, that is going to be affected somewhat by luck. But to some extent, that's a player-created competition. That's not what the actual end game is about. The actual end game is about completing the greatest challenges the game has to offer, and that's sort of what we design around.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Next question came from someone named Imba Character, which is, I love that name, who said, Mythic 5-man dungeons only drop a couple of items, sometimes even only gold and artifact power. Would it be possible to add something like the Blood Shard gambling system in Diablo 3 to increase the draw of mythics?
Oh, so more RNG. That sounds like a great idea. That seems like what people want, right? So in all seriousness, though, Mythic, so the end of dungeon Mythic Keystone chests are definitely a challenging thing for us to balance because we want them to offer gear that's comparable to what raiding can offer, but we also allow them to be repeated as many times as you want in a week if you have enough keystones to work with, unlike raid bosses. So if we made everyone get loot or made the loot more consistent or made them even more lucrative, I think we risk tipping that balance between dungeons and raids too far in the favor of dungeons. That said, I think there actually is something kind of like the Diablo 3 Kadala system that could be interesting for us to explore as a way of letting players target certain slots on their character that they're looking to get a better item in or looking to shore up. So I don't know if dungeons are the right place for that, but that's certainly something we could try doing with a currency at some point and see how it goes.
Cool. Next question came from N2750. Who asked, a lot of the chess piece armor designs in Legion are fantastic. However, when wearing tabards for reputation gain or to teleport, the chest armor appearances are covered. Would it be possible to add a transmog option to hide tabards?
That's interesting suggestion. I think it's something we could look into. I think the reason why we don't have an option to hide the tabard is because for so much of the time, a tabard is a purely cosmetic piece. So the thought was, well, if you don't want to wear a tabard, then don't wear a tabard. But yes, to the extent that we have a couple that have gameplay implications, we haven't really done the reputation tabard in a while, so that's less of a concern. But if you have your tabard from the Lich King, or you have a tabard that has some other activated effect, then it makes sense that you might want to have that activated effect, but not have that particular appearance. We can certainly look into into adding a hide or hidden tabard transmog option.
Okay, cool. Another transmogrification question comes from, I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, but I think it's Yoning Chang, who said, there are very limited transmog options for Demon Hunter Warglaves. Could we have more transmog types such as fist weapons? Could Demon Hunters be allowed to use Kelsarar, the single-handed sword, for tanks?
So, there's a couple different questions here. So fist weapon transmog is always a tricky subject because most of our transmog rules and restrictions are based on animation sets, particularly where some classes have specific abilities that assume you have a certain type of weapon equipped, whereas fist weapons use unarmed attack animations that may not work or make sense with those abilities. So that's why that's kind of in a separate category. Now, obviously, for this expansion, all Demon Hunters are using Warglaves because you're all using your artifact, and your artifact, they're glaives. In the long run, in later expansions, we certainly have plans and have imagined that Demon Hunters would be able to use other types of one-handed, especially bladed weapons, and could mix and match them depending on their style. So that would open up a lot more transmog options in the long run. But for now, when you're using glaives, again, those have a particular animation set associated with them, and just using something like a single one-hander doesn't really fit or make sense in that regard.
And a lot of that is tied to the actual abilities that the class is doing as well. We've given a similar answer to this before when it's asked in other areas, and the sort of response to that usually comes back as, but you can transmogrify a gun into a bow, and those use different base animations. But
right.
I think the important distinction to cover there is that when you're playing a hunter and you're transmogging between a bow and a gun, that doesn't change the animation of how your different abilities look.
Exactly. I mean, a specific example is something like Mutilate for, the Mutilate animation for rogues. If you could transmog your daggers into maces, then that would lead to some that leads to some honest and for some players I totally get, like, you might think, well, I just want to use maces because they're cool. I don't mind if I look kind of goofy, but to some extent, we also are trying to balance a consistent artistic aesthetic of the game while allowing players to express themselves creatively, and we draw lines trying to balance the two. And we recognize there are some people who would prefer to have more artistic expression of their own creativity, but we have to draw the line somewhere.
Okay. Next question came from Maulock, who asked, are there any plans to add fishing rod transmogrification options? So transmog your fishing rod into a different fishing rod, I guess.
It's not something that we've really considered. I think we're the answer is honestly probably not. You don't spend enough time with your fishing rod out, and obviously we have the artifact fishing pole right now. But, in general, we'd rather offer a variety of fishing rods that have similar functionality so players can choose the one that they prefer most to equip. But, whenever we're talking about something like this, we're also trying to be mindful of UI and UI bloat considerations. Right? Do we want to add a whole other category to the transmog UI for something that is very infrequently used and that only a small subset of people are actively going to, take advantage of, at the expense of making the whole screen more cluttered and having more options. And this is something that feels probably too niche for the time being. Now, if we did something that really doubled down on fishing and made walking around with fishing poles out much more common, then that would be a direction we might explore.
Okay. Question from Cavis, who said, many profession patterns from previous expansions are no longer available or have become world drops and have become impossible or very difficult to obtain. On the other hand, a lot of current patterns require you to repeatedly craft the same item to quote-unquote rank up the pattern. Would it be possible to combine these mechanics so you have a chance to obtain legacy patterns from crafting new patterns? This way, players can receive some small surprises while farming for 3-star recipes, and old recipes can find their way back into the game.
So it's an interesting idea. There's a couple of suggestions here. So definitely there are some recipes, as with a lot of parts of the game, as with items, appearances, other pieces of old content, there are some recipes that are no longer available. Some of those are no longer available almost by accident because the content that used to award them was just naturally retired as the game evolved, as we went back and updated some zone or some dungeon. And for those, I think we're looking for places to reintroduce those items. There's some other recipes or other old items that are intentionally no longer obtainable, and they were meant to be sort of prestigious mementos for those who were there and around at the time. There's a reason why, in our recipe, in our profession interface now, where we show unlearned patterns, there's some that we only show if you know them, and don't show them to you at all if you don't, because they're not obtainable normally, and that's just, we don't want to dangle them out there as something that you should be able to chase after. But that said, we're definitely looking for ways to reintroduce a lot of those old patterns. It's an interesting suggestion. I'm not sure if it's, I'm not sure if that's actually the best way of doing it. There's something a little strange about if I'm practicing making demon steel shoulders, and then that suddenly gives me insight into how to make a Zul'Gurub pattern from 8 years ago that feels very unrelated. Certainly for a player who doesn't understand those are legacy patterns, who wasn't around back then, who is just playing Legion, who's just trying to skill up their blacksmithing, and suddenly they learn a level 70 recipe, that probably would be confusing to them.
Yeah, especially if they're trying to level up their blacksmithing and now they get a pattern that's not going to help them level it up at all.
Exactly. So I think we'd rather focus on collection mechanisms that are more active, where people who care about collecting these old recipes can go to specific places in the game. Maybe it's going back to some of those old zones or related areas and earn them through some time investment of your own.
Cool. Next question came from Azram, I believe is how you pronounce this. Said, monks sheath one-handed weapons to their backs. Would it be possible to add a customizable option in the future so players can decide whether they want to sheath weapons to their backs or their belts?
That's an interesting question. That's something, it's something we could do, something we could explore. Right now, the sheath location is a property of the item when we create the item. There are some items that really would only work in one location or the other. It would cause a lot of really bad clipping issues where the weapon might actually, penetrate, stick through your character's model if sheathed in the wrong location. But there are also plenty of weapons that probably could sheath in either location. It's just something that we would have to dedicate some programming and UI resources to make happen. But that could be a very cool option. I think we're always looking at and thinking about ways for characters to customize their appearance and how they present their characters.
Okay, cool. Question from Talon30712, who said, is there any chance currently unobtainable gold medal challenger mode rewards and elite PvP equipment will be added to the black market auction house in the future? So obviously these are things that have kind of gone away at this point. Yeah. Is there a chance of them coming back through the black market auction house?
There's always a chance. I'll never say never. I think the gold medal challenge mode rewards in particular from Pandaria, I think we really set those up. We made it clear ahead of time that those were going to be going away once Mists ended, and that there was a finite timeline within which to obtain them. And we recognize that they're very cool. The class hall sets provided a chance for people to get similar appearances. In some ways, the class hall sets from Legion were inspired by the Mist Challenge Mode armor. So if there was something about that general silhouette that you really liked, for your character's appearance, you could get it that way. In terms of those particular looks, though, I think we want those to be something that stands as an accomplishment and a way to show off if you played Mists of Pandaria and completed those gold challenge modes back then. And there's value in having some things in the game be like that. 99.9% of the armor, the weapons, the other rewards in the game never go away. Some things might become a bit more rare, like the Invincible Mount from the Lich King, which was a 100% drop chance if you killed him in 2009, 2010. Now it's, a lower percent, but you can still get it. But there's a handful of things that we want to just stand as a way of showing off that you were there years ago and did something special.
Cool. Next question comes from Machete, who asked, will more NPC equipment be added to the game? For example, the hammer and shield wielded by the Knights of the Silver Hand, or the weapons and armor of Suramar guards?
Again, we always look to try to get things like that in players' hands where possible. Obviously, we haven't really done much in the way of giving out weapons or similar equipped things this expansion because the artifacts occupied that entire space.
Yeah.
When it comes to armor, where possible, we try to make player-equipped versions of armor sets. However, in a lot of cases, NPC armor is built in a very different way from armor we build for player characters. When we're building armor for a Nightborn Guard, that armor is specifically only fitted as part of their model on, the Nightborn shoulders, the Nightborn head, versus anything made for players, it needs to scale and be fitted to the head of a Pandaren, a Tauren, a Gnome, a Goblin, their models. And that's actually significantly more time on the art side. So often we have a choice between making 3 NPC outfits or making 1 NPC outfit that could also be worn by a player.
Right.
And and sometimes we go for the NPC outfit that can be worn by the player, but we can't do that all the time, or it would really hurt the diversity of our world overall. But that's something we're always looking to do. We recognize the value of it, particularly with something really distinctive like, the Nightborn look in Suramar. So that may be something where, in the future we make a set of armor for players that looks very much like that, so you can have that look if you want it.
Cool. Question from Arcross, who said, in a previous interview, it was brought up that combat effects and transmog options for ranged weapons are not as cool and impressive as melee counterparts. The answer then was that ranged weapons in Legion would have distinct characteristics, similar to Thoradal and Sunwell, that could fire energy bolts. So far, it doesn't feel like this has been implemented yet. Will such effects be added to future artifact appearances?
So at this point, no. Such effects are not going to be added to artifact appearances. It's something that we still want to continue to do as the game progresses in general. I think we said at BlizzCon, when we talked about Legion in particular, that a lot of our character improvements were starting with Melee in terms of animations, in terms of some of their effects, because we felt that honestly Melee were more lacking. They were farther behind where we wanted to be than ranged classes like hunters and spellcasters, because just many of their animations were very simple and one-dimensional, and so we had to start somewhere. We started there. As Legion patches continue and moving on into our next expansion and beyond, we're looking to bring a lot of that same treatment and a lot of those same improvements to ranged classes and spellcasters. And so a lot of that may, for the case of hunters, come into the form of more customization of the missiles that you're shooting. One really small example of something that I think is cool, though not exactly a response to this question, in the patch 7.2 PTR that's currently up, and obviously when the patch comes to the live servers, we've made an improvement to hunter animations where actually the top half of your body, like your torso, will turn to face the thing that you're shooting at. So you're no longer like running in one direction and firing arrows off at a 90-degree angle. If you actually just log on to the PTR and stand in front of training dummies and tab between them as you shoot, you'll actually see your character twist slightly and look to face your current target.
That's really cool.
It's subtle things like that we're looking to do, as well as more flashy things like visual effects to improve the experience and the feel of being a ranged player.
Awesome. Question from, I'm sure I'm going to say this wrong. I think it's Hamwater Milo? Hamwater Mello, something like that. Apologies if I said that incorrectly. The penalty for resetting artifact power is currently very severe. Would you consider lowering the penalty or even making it free, but adding a cooldown mechanic, making it easier for new players or players with multiple tunes to modify their characters?
Yeah, so I think looking back, the penalty for respecing an artifact weapon definitely was too severe. We were worried when we created the system. We didn't want it to become just another set of talents where you would respec your whole artifact from fight to fight, or whether you're going to go raid or do PvP. And so we made the penalty. We wanted it to be something that you felt you could do if you really needed to, but we wanted it to be very, important and weighty. But it was so much that it felt like it was too punishing. If we could go back, we definitely would make it smaller, make it different. At this point in Legion, however, I think that phase of the game has passed, and so it's not likely that we're going to revisit it. If you're someone who's a new player just starting out now, we have ways of getting your artifact knowledge caught up to a much higher level so that you're very quickly getting 20, 25 or more points. And certainly any alts or established main characters in Legion have pretty much completed artifact weapons, and you're going down a linear path as opposed to making lots of choices that you might want to respec. And the 7-2 artifact progression is much more linear. There aren't nearly as many choices in the same way, since you're unlocking new traits, but you're going to get the 4-point minor trait, then the utility trait, and then the gold border power trait in that order. So it's not something that feels like it makes sense to redesign at this point, even though we recognize it's something that we did wrong when Legion first came out.
Okay. Got another question from the same person who asked, the designs in Court of Stars that require specific classes or professions to activate mechanisms adds a lot of flavor to the dungeon. Are there plans to include more of this kind of design in future dungeons and raids? So like there's the boss that if you have an alchemist, you can sort of poison him and kill him off a little bit early.
Exactly. Yep. Or if you're a rogue, since rogue can also do that. So I think that's something that is a cool feature of Court of Stars. It's something we would like to do in other places where it makes sense. We don't want to overdo it. I think things like that feel fresh and different because they're fresh and different. If every dungeon were full of those interactables, it just becomes something that you almost take for granted, or maybe worry about more than we want you to when you're forming your group composition for that dungeon. That said, I think there have been moments like the shortcut in Shattered Halls back in Burning Crusade, where if you had a rogue or a blacksmith, you could get through a door, and if you didn't, you had to take a longer way around. Things like that let players feel special for a choice they've made and make the group appreciate them are the sort of thing that we're always looking to do, but we just don't want to overdo it.
Okay. Another question here, again from the same asker, who said, Assault on Violet Hole does not have a mythic keystone difficulty. Is this because of the timer mechanic, and would it be possible to make it into a multiple wave survival challenge?
So yes, it's basically because of the timer mechanic. We could completely redefine what completing the keystone means, but I think that would add a lot of complexity and confusion to the system if it instead were just an infinite wave event, and beating the keystone meant making it past wave X. But yeah, I think trying to adapt it to the current structure there isn't much you could do to speed it up.
Yeah.
And if we considered looking into ways of adding the equivalent of a gong, like we did back in Siege of Nizao Temple in Pandaria, to make the waves come faster under players' control, and that would have actually turned into a dungeon that was much, much faster than even Maw of Souls. If you're sending multiple waves at a time, Violet Hold is actually probably only a 10-minute dungeon.
Yeah.
I think it's a dungeon that we updated because it's a part of Dalaran. It made sense to bring it into the new expansion. It gave us a chance to present some cool fights in that setting, but it's not a brand new dungeon for Legion, and I think we feel the system has enough variety with the other 9 dungeons currently, and then of course Upper Karazhan, Lower Karazhan, and the Cathedral of Eternal Night coming in patch 7.2 as new keystone dungeons for a total of 12.
Yeah, so there'll be a lot of variety at that point. Question from Soft Tank, who said, the personal phasing technology used in the Suramar hub Shalaran appears to be very sophisticated. Will it be possible in the future to allow players to have their own house in WoW, not quite like the Garrison, but instead a home in one of Azeroth's main cities where players can decorate or plant some flowers? Just sort of a little personal space carved out of a main city.
So I think there's 2 different parts to that question, I think. The general idea of being able to customize a piece of the world to reflect your choices and your actions is something that we've done in a few different places we're likely to continue to do. Chalaran is a great example. The farm back in Pandaria, the Seat of Knowledge in Pandaria, where depending on your archaeology exploits, you could kind of assemble a collection that reflected what you had gotten and placed. Those are all things that we like, we want to continue to do. Player housing as a system is something that we certainly, we discuss. It's something that comes up. We know a lot of other games have done it. We know it's something that players have interest in. I think we still run into a couple of stumbling blocks when we think about applying it to our game. The first question is, well, what am I supposed to do in my house? I recognize that just decorating and feeling like you have a place of your own has value in and of itself, but we worry, and the Garrison, I think, reinforced some of these worries for us about creating a personal space for players where we expect them to go and spend time that is separate from the game world. It feels like it risks removing people from the world and emptying out the world, which hurts the massively multiplayer feel, potentially, of WoW. And second, I think that if we want to do that right, by World of Warcraft standards, by Blizzard standards, we need to offer a lot of different options. I don't think it's enough for us to say, you have a house. You can choose to plant red flowers or blue flowers in this pot, or you can choose, one of two different types of chairs or whatever. I think players would expect a lot more. Players would expect much deeper customization, and there's a significant...
Where are the flowers, and where are the chairs?
Well, exactly, right.
How
exactly.
many are there? And,
yes,
yeah.
And different styles, and what if I'm a troll, and what if I'm a blood elf, what if I'm an orc, what if I'm a gnome, what if I'm a Gilnean, Worgen?
Yeah.
All these things have different expectations for it to feel like it's delivering on your fantasy of what a house should mean to you. And once we start going down that road, again, it's something that we could do, but, we, as with anything... We're always expanding the team. We're always hiring more people. So I hate to make the resources argument, but the reality is, for any given number of people we have on the team, whether it's 10 or 100 or 300, there's always the question of what are we going to have those people work on in the next months. And the scope of a feature like player housing is, do we want player housing, or do we want to build a city the size of Suramar?
Right.
Do we want player housing, or do we want to build? I hate to even use the example of an extra raid, but. That's actually where it comes from, right?
Yeah.
And so...
and that's kind of no matter how many people we actually
exactly.
have, that's still going to be...
And so it comes down to those decisions, and that's why when we discuss player housing, we've yet to feel like it's the right time, the right moment, that we have the right idea to make it all come together as the right thing for World of Warcraft right now. That's not to say that couldn't change in the future, but I think that's where we still stand today.
Okay. Cool. Question from No Name, who said... In Val'Sharah, we see players sharing a mount with Tyrande. In future children's weeks, could we let the orphans climb onto player mounts together? When the orphans have to run on foot beside mounted players, it feels cruel. At least give them a pony or something of their own.
I mean, the children in Children's Week, they seem generally very happy and excited to accompany you around the world. They're enthusiastic. They're getting some exercise. It's very good for them if they've been cooped up in the orphanage all the time. Stuck in bed or stuck in a chair.
Yeah.
So, I think we're just trying to really get them some aerobic activity, improve their cardiovascular fitness, and, I think that's overall a good thing. But yes, no, the idea of multi-seat, I think it works well for some mounts. Other mounts don't really have space for a second unit, player or NPC or otherwise, to fit. But that's definitely a suggestion that's a fun one that we appreciate.
It's a cool suggestion.
Thank you.
A question from Dumb Dog said, players love that there's a druid lying in a bathtub in the Dalaran First Aid building. Would it be possible to have a bathtub toy or even tub mount? Maybe a 2-person flying bathtub engineering mount. One day a gnome was sharing a hot bath with their loved one when they suddenly wanted to go somewhere else in a hurry. Bam! The creation of the 2-seated flying bathtub.
Honestly, when it comes to gnomes, when it comes to engineering, anything is possible.
Yeah.
So we'll just have to wait and see. That's all I can say on that one.
Interesting. Question from Mithril, who said, will Dwarven Paladins someday get their own racial charger, such as a war ram?
That's a cool idea. No specific plans right now, but definitely we recognize that for, specific... It's the same way, druids have some variation in their forms depending on their race because of that close connection there. The different lines of paladins, whether you're a Sunwalker Tauren, whether you're a Blood Knight on the Blood Elf side, whether you're one of the traditional alliance races, they have different, heritage, and it's great to be able to express that in different ways where it makes sense. That's a very cool idea.
Cool. Another question from Hamwater Milo from earlier, who said, it stands to reason that the new class mounts will come with a series of epic class quests, but it was also mentioned that some class mounts will have specialization variants. Will the quests also vary depending on specialization?
So, just to clarify, I think there are quests associated with obtaining these mounts, but they're not necessarily epic long campaigns. The mount is actually set up as a reward for finishing the entire Broken Shore class order associated campaign experience.
Okay.
Now there are quests that exist that are, they're fun experiences that have a lot of flavor to them, a lot of story to them, to explain the origins of the mount that you're getting and to deliver it to you. But it's different. It's a different experience than the artifact quest line in the past, for example. And so I would caution players against expecting too much on that end. I think the mount is just an awesome reward that we want to give players at the end of the Legion Fall campaign in patch 7.2. So some of the mounts do vary by specialization for certain classes, and I think that more reflects where the class specs have very different characters from each other. One of the most obvious examples is the priest class, where a glowing holy mount would feel completely inappropriate for a shadow priest, and vice versa. So we needed to go in different directions there. Or the mage disc, where it has frost, arcane, or fire particles, depending on the spec that you're using. Doesn't make sense, doesn't fit for all classes, but that's just sort of how it played out. The quests that exist to obtain the mount, there's 12 of them, one for each class.
Okay, cool. And there are a lot of other, while the mounts specifically aren't part of an overall epic, like difficult or long quest chain, there are a lot of other quest chains that are along those lines that are related to other content.
And yes, specifically unlocking the additional artifact appearance for each spec that we're adding in 7.2, that is a more spec-specific skill challenge that is a focused quest line for you.
Cool. Question from, I'm actually not sure how to pronounce this. I believe it's WDEA Glue.
Sure.
I'm not sure. Apologies if I said your name wrong. Said, are there any plans to have an app for pet battling?
That's, I think that's certainly something that we've heard suggested in the past. We chose to focus on supporting the Legion features in particular for our Legion Companion app this time around. That felt like the right fit to accompany the launch of Legion. It's been tremendously successful. We've, heard great feedback from our fans who've enjoyed being able to interact with the game and stay in touch with the game while they're away from their computers through the app. Something like pet battling is certainly a strong candidate for the type of thing we might add to future mobile plans, but we have nothing specific to announce right now.
Okay. We have several more questions from Hamwater Milo.
Okay.
Sent in a ton of questions. So thank you for all these questions. It's great. This question is about the website. Asked, the new World of Warcraft official website is great, but the Armory webpage is inaccessible from the new site. Armory update frequency is also slower, and forum posts can no longer directly link item information. Are there any plans to overhaul and release a new version of the Armory? I think the answer to that one is yes, that we put out the current website as it is, and we're still working on the Armory updates.
Our website improvements are an ongoing process, and I think Armory profiles are very, very high on the list of items that's expected in the near future. So, yes, we're working on it. That's not obviously my area of specialty, but I believe that should be something that players are able to see and enjoy in the near future.
Yeah. He also asked, in the Class Hall campaigns, we see Ulduar keepers join the war effort. Thorim, Hodir, and even Odin himself have joined the battle against the Burning Legion. Is there any chance we'll see Ra-Den make a comeback?
That's a good question. There is a chance. Keep an eye on patch 7.2, and you might see some things from Ra-Den.
Interesting. Question. It's another one from Hamwater Milo. Said, can you share any information on what the Devilsaur egg beneath Shalaran is for? It can't just be a decoration, can it?
I genuinely have no idea. I'm sorry. You've got me stumped on this one. I don't know.
The Devilsaur egg between Shalaran, the snake in Gundrak. Is just sometimes there's just mysteries around the world that we don't know. We don't know the answer. Even we don't know how that got there.
Ancient and mysterious places have ancient and mysterious things.
Yeah. And then the last question we have was, again, from Hamwater Milo, who said, the next few patches all revolve around fighting the Burning Legion and even assaulting Argus. Are there any plans involving N'Zoth, the old god?
I mean, they're definitely the old gods lurk behind a lot of the troubles that plague the forces of good in Azeroth. That's for sure. I think we saw some hints of the old gods' influence in the Emerald Nightmare raid in particular. Il'gynoth is certainly a creature very much inspired by the old gods. And N'Zoth is, to our knowledge, the last remaining one on Azeroth. As you note, the story coming up is definitely going to focus a lot on fighting the Legion at the Tomb of Sargeras and then taking the fight to them in Argus. But, I think it's safe to say that we have not heard the last of the old gods.
They just keep coming back, turns out. All right, well, thank you so much for being here to answer these questions.
My pleasure. Thanks for all the great questions. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. And thanks again. Yeah, like you said, thanks again for sending in all these great questions. And we will see you guys next time.